to do all over.
All right. Hello, everybody. Good evening. Hello, wherever you are. Thank you all so very much for making the time available to attend our webinar tonight. Oh my goodness. I see all of our speakers presents. Let me hold on. Let me close this window real quick. Okay, there we go. Okay. All right. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, perfect. Okay, thank you. Okay, so I'm gonna do a very quick introduction, and then I'll take a turn to my staff, and then I will introduce the speakers for tonight, and then Evan will be moderating the discussions for tonight. Okay, so I'm very honored to be with all of you today. My name is Ko, and I serve as the President and Chief Executive Officer of the California Korean Youth Connections. We have been running this organization for 12 years. Totally volunteers. We give all of our time and our energy to our youth and our communities. We were once a refugee, once in immigrants, once in asylum seekers, once in homeless. But a lot of our Korean people who came to the US are now homeowners. So homeless to homeowners. So what an incredible story of a lot of Korean people. And CKYC does a lot of advocacy efforts because we believe in lift out the voices of the marginalized communities, of the refugees, partnership with, a lot of different partner. I see API is here in APAPA, so we're going to be here for her shortly. But this is such a great event that you all are able to make it, and thankful to our speakers. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Praise for a quick introduction.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Praise. I'm one of the program manager for CKYC, specifically the College and Career Mentorship Program. I've been with CKYC for I think about a year now. So, time flies is really fast. I'm not actually in California. I'm here currently in Pennsylvania, well, Philadelphia. Yeah, working in a research lab, but not so much. I try to give back as much as I can to the community as well as help the youth. So I'm looking forward to this meeting, and I really appreciate for each and every one of your guys' time. So thank you, and I'm giving back to you, Cole.
Thank you, Praise. Okay, Evan, please do a quick introduction.
Hi, everyone. My name is Evan Ta. I'm the Civic Engagement Program Coordinator. I work very closely with Ko here at California Korean Youth Connection. It is so nice to meet you guys. I'm currently located in Los Angeles.
Excellent. Thank you, Evan. And Evan is going to be moderating the discussion tonight. Okay, so to be respectful of everyone's time and our speaker's time, I'm going to go ahead and get started with my opening remark. So, as many of you know, every 10 years, the US redraws congressional maps to reflect population changes. While this may sound technical, redistricting shapes who gets a voice in government, which community receives resources, and ultimately the direction of our democracy. Tonight, we'll explore what it means for California and for the nations. The California Korean Youth Connection, CKYC, is a registered 501c3 nonprofit and nonpartisan public charity. We do not endorse, support, or oppose any candidates for elected official, public officials, former public official, political party, or ballot propositions. All educational programming and civic engagement activities are considered solely for the purpose of informing and empowering communities in a nonpartisan manners. We're so honored to be joined by two incredible speakers who will be joining the panel tonight. Julie Su, Julie, can you wave? Oh, yeah, you already did. Okay, perfect. So our youth can identify. So Secretary Sue is a nationally recognized workers' rights and civil rights expert who served in President Biden's cabinet as the Secretary of Labor. Prior to that, she served as Deputy Secretary, and before that as the California Labor Secretary, appointed by Governor Gavin Newsom. Secretary Sue brought a wealth of experience from 17 years as an attorney at Asian American Advancing Justice in Los Angeles and nearly 2 decades prior to being appointed to government positions. She also served as California Labor Commissioner from 2011 and to 2018, where she was widely accredited with renaissance in enforcement and creative approach to combating wage theft and protecting immigrant workers. Secretary Sue graduated from Stanford University and Harvard Law School and received a MacArthur Genius Award, and she speaks Mandarin and Spanish. And I had the pleasure of meeting Secretary Sue at the 1990 Institute a couple weeks ago, where she was one of the panels in the conference. So thank you. We're so honored that you are able to join us. The second panelist is Mary Nicely. Deputy Nicely served as the Deputy Superintendent of the California Department of Education, where she oversees the equity branch and key initiative to strengthen schools across the states. Previously, she was Deputy Superintendent for the Information and Technology branch and Senior Advisor to State Superintendent Tony Thurmond, leading efforts on teacher recruitment and retention, community schools, and public-private partnerships. She played a central role in the Digital Divide Task Force, collaborated with technology companies and internet providers to expand access for students and educators. Earlier in her careers, Mary was the Chief of Staff and District Director to then Assemblymember Tony Thurmond. A first-generation Burmese American, Mary holds a degree in political economy from UC Berkeley and in business administration from Monterey Peninsula Community College. And I had the pleasure of knowing Mary for many years. Back then, I was the intern for Assemblymember Ron Bogdan, and next door was Assemblymember Tony Thurmond. So we're able to, talk and communicate a lot. So I'm very honored as well, Mary, for you able to join us. And for our third speaker, I will introduce after the Q&A portion, okay? So Evan, I'll turn the mic to you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Ko. So, of course, we are here to discuss the implications of what it means for California to be redistricting. As we know, this is something that isn't really particularly common in the middle of a decade. And we know that this is also in response to several other states that are doing this. I'd like to direct my first question to Deputy Nicely. So, Deputy, you've spent much of your career advancing equity in California schools and California education. How does congressional redistricting connect to educational equity and access to resources for students and their families as well?
So thank you so much for having me here. And can I first off say how proud I am of all of you for becoming civically engaged. Having been a first generation immigrant from Burma, my parents came over in the 60s. You know what your country has gone through, living under tyranny for over 60 years and fighting civil war on the border as an ethnic minority. So I'm just so proud of you all for stepping into civic engagement in this country. And I see you as the next generation of leaders to give voice to the refugee Burmese community in this country. So I'm just so proud to be here and to be able to talk to you all today. So this congressional redistricting is critical to the public education system in California. We have been under threat since January 15th or whatever inauguration was, of not receiving our federal funding. And we have literally had to sue this administration. We must have about 40 lawsuits pending. We have fought very hard to get all of the billions of dollars released, and we've won. But if we do not get this fixed, we are in danger of not having our federal funding continued next year. So we are lucky we made it through, because the former administration under that Congress, under President Biden, is the one that has allocated the funding that we're receiving now. We are under danger of losing over $8 billion for just K-12 public education and $16 billion overall to our higher education funding as well. So this is a critical time for us to be completely engaged in fighting this, what is happening in these other states with redistricting, really to do what you have all seen happen in Burma, an election that is not fair. I mean, it's just clearly, you don't want to use the word rigged, but this is what is happening. They are rigging the vote to take away the voices of the American people and of our citizens, non-citizens, refugees, immigrants. So for public education, this is critical that this not be allowed to happen, because this Congress that is trying to be put in place will cut our public education funding. As of today, 200 people from the Department of Education in Washington, D.C. were given pink slips. And that's not including who was already laid off and fired without any due process in the months leading up to this. So it is critical to our public education system to survive that we deal with this congressional redistricting.
Thank you so much for your answer. I really liked a lot of the points that you said. I want to direct this next question to Secretary Sue. So, Secretary, you've spent decades fighting for workers' rights and for immigrant protections. How do you see congressional maps influencing these labor rights, these workplace protections, and overall the broader fight for economic justice?
Thank you, Evan. Thank you so much for doing this. I want to echo the Deputy Superintendent's remarks, just really giving praise to all of you for being here and for being active and for wanting to learn as much as you can so that you can be active participants in this really critical moment in our state and our nation's history. Just to build on the Deputy Superintendent's remarks for one moment, redistricting, it seems like sort of a boring thing frankly, it happens every 10 years. And it's really meant to make sure that people have representation, right, in the House of Representatives, which is the branch of the legislative branch that the House that is dependent on the number of people that live in a certain area. And we are now in a moment where that whole process has become completely politicized for the interests of one man who wants to maintain power. And I know this is a nonpartisan space, and so I'm going to try to be careful about talking about what's actually going on and laying out the facts. And it's just so important to learn what the facts are, because it's something that I think has become harder and harder to do. And I really, again, honor all of you young people who are trying to figure out what is happening in the world at a time when it's very hard to break through the noise. And that's why when Co asked me to do this, I immediately said yes, because I hope that and I think I speak for the Deputy Superintendent, that for those of us who are Asian Americans who find ourselves in really high positions of power, it means a lot to see our own community and the young people in our community engaged and passionate about participating in this democracy that is so at risk in this moment. So congratulations to all of you for that. And I'm just thrilled to be here to talk about this. So Evan, your question is important. So what does this redistricting mean for workers and immigrants' rights? Well, if you see what this administration has already done, the attacks on immigrants, I mean, you guys are all seeing that, right? You see that, I'm in LA like you, Evan, and I lived in DC the last 4 years. And when I came back to LA after the election, I realized that this administration was not just going to, kind of pass policies that were harmful to the communities I cared about. They were going to weaponize the entire federal government to criminalize and to exclude and to, frankly, like round up and imprison and disappear people based on skin color. That is what's happening right now to immigrants in this country. And part of the reason it's happening is because this current executive administration has won an election and continued to base, policy on completely vilifying immigrants, making up stuff entirely about immigrants and what immigrants do and who immigrants are, but doing that to justify the actions they've taken from LA, where I am, to Chicago, to Washington, D.C., and now to Portland, Oregon. And all of the things that they're doing, I don't know how many of you guys are just seeing the videos. What I've been encouraging people to do is to videotape when you see these sorts of things, because it's really horrific that they're rounding up people on their way to work, dropping their kids off at school, watering the lawn in front of their houses, and just taking them and rounding them up and then sending them away. And it doesn't matter if they're undocumented or not. It doesn't matter if they have a criminal record or not. This is their approach to immigrants and immigration. And one reason they're getting away with it is because the Congress, which is supposed to provide a check on the executive branch, right? You all learned this about the 3 branches of government and the checks and balances. This Congress has completely failed to provide a check. They have looked the other way. They've, sort of rubber stamped what's going on. And that's why this redistricting is so important, because Donald Trump knows that if he cannot hold on to the House of Representatives, if he cannot hold on to a majority in Congress, then there will be a check on his completely lawless actions. And just to say one thing, Evan, on workers' rights, I've spent my entire professional career working and fighting alongside working people to make sure that they get a just day's pay for a hard day's work, that they come home healthy and safe at the end of the workday, and they have a right to organize and unionize when they want to. And this administration has also stripped away many of those protections. So if we want things like a higher minimum wage, for example, if we want things like to protect workers from heat, if we want the ability for workers to speak up without retaliation and without getting fired, we need stronger laws to do that, and we need Congress to act. One last thing I'll just say is, at the intersection of sort of workers' rights and immigrants' rights is refugee rights. I know it's one that, the Deputy Superintendent mentioned. It's incredibly important to this community. And this administration has also capped the number of refugees at the lowest number in history. So in addition to terrorizing the communities that live already in the US, they're trying to close off people who, part of the American tradition is to be a welcoming space for people who are fleeing terror or persecution. And this administration, in its zeal to perpetuate an entirely racist agenda, has also cut that off. And having a strong Congress who can hold them accountable and push back on that is really important. And that's what the redistricting is all about.
Thank you so much. Now, this question I will direct back to Deputy Nicely. So, Deputy, California's Independent Redistricting Commission is often held up as a national model. Of course, this goes in line with the theory that in our federalist system, that states serve as laboratories of democracy. From your vantage point in education and community work, what do you think California got right, and where are some areas that we could potentially have for improvement?
I think we got it right when we created the independent redistricting. So there's really, people are represented by we're not going to be partisan here, but there are communities that have elected the people that are representative of them. So I think our independent redistricting has been done right. We are having to upend it a bit now, mainly in, to fight fire with fire to some extent. And that's why it's going to go back to the way it was once we get to 2030. So I don't think that there's anything wrong with what we did. I think what is in place is right. We think the representation that folks are getting are who they are represented by. We just happen to have happen to have a democratic population and people that are interested in the democratic principles. But if you look at the representatives that are represented by the areas that are represented by Republicans, those are majority Republican districts. I think they got it right. The numbers were right. I don't think that there's anything wrong with what we have done in the past. Right now, though, is a critical time for us to have to fight fire with fire, unfortunately, or we are going to lose this democracy. That's how serious this is. And in education, the redistricting, and not the redistricting, but the districts as they are right now, also on school boards, are representative of their constituencies. They really do, follow along those lines of who is there. We've got some school districts that may not be as representative, and I think that there are constituencies that are regretting who they may have elected, but that's why we have elections, and that's why we have a democracy. We allow people to be elected. People have a chance to go back and re-elect or not elect someone that did not represent them. So I think California overall is doing a fine job of what we have in our districting and our independent districting. I do want to go back to the first question, though, because something that Secretary Sue said, oh, I forgot to answer the actual equity part of the funding that comes from the federal government that we are at risk of losing. And these are the title funds that are specifically set up for equity. They are for our most disadvantaged students to be able to get funding from the federal government. Those are the ones that most at risk. Our funding that comes for our migrant and multilingual populations and refugees also comes from the federal government. That was the last one that we fought the hardest to get that was going to be taken away. So just around equity, when we talk about the federal funds, those are the funds that are really used to bring equity to our schools more than anything else. So I did want to bring that up. I forgot to say that, and I should have said that. But yeah, I don't see anything wrong with what we've had. We are just at a critical point now where we do have to go and fight fire with fire, really, and stop this election, stop this way of taking away our voice and our ability to have fair representation in Washington, D.C. Really, that is what it's going to come down to.
So a quick follow-up on that question, and I'll also open up this question to the secretary as well. How do we go about navigating redistricting in a way where we can ensure that constituents are able to pick their officials and not the other way around, where we have officials that are redistricting so that they can pick their constituents? How do we go about navigating that? I'll open it up to either one of you.
I'll let Secretary Sue chime in first if
Sure.
she likes.
I'll jump in, and please jump in too. So that is, it's an important question because you'll hear a lot of advertisements around Prop 50, and one of them will say that the whole idea of the independent commission that the deputy superintendent talked about was to create a body that would redistrict every 10 years in a way that that really just focused on the well-being and the fair representation of Californians, to take it out of party politics, really, right? And your question, Evan, about whether people get to pick their representatives or representatives get to pick their people stems out of the fact that in a lot of states, the body that does redistricting is the state legislature themselves. So then you can imagine they have an interest in trying to draw district lines that maximize their ability to stay in office, right? So California tried to counter that by coming up with this independent commission idea. So some people will say, well, we shouldn't tamper with that because that's going back to a world in which everything was too partisan. What I wanted to say to all of you is we have to understand the game that we are playing right now, right? I said this recently, I'll say this here. I have a kid who's, maybe around your guys, maybe a little bit older. She's 21, and she played sports. And the way I analogize it is, we always you probably have heard this too if you play sports, like you got to play the game the right way no matter how the other team plays. You got to play you got to play by the rules. What's happening right now in our country is it's not like we have one party that's playing by the rules and one that's, fouling every time they come down the court. We have an entire situation where the other team is not playing the same game. They're like running down the court and punching us in the face. And no one's calling fouls and no one's, the scoreboard is off. And so if we want to say, well, we still shouldn't travel and we still should, right? Like, if we're doing that, then we are completely going to lose, and not just lose the game, but we're going to let ourselves get punched in the face on a regular basis. So to me, the Prop 50, the effort to now allow California to draw new districts for this election, right? Or until, as the Deputy Superintendent said, until 2030 or 2031, is understanding the game that we are playing right now. Because the House of Representatives right now, the numbers are very, very close. Republicans have a majority by, I think it's by 5. It's like 214 Democrats to 219 Republicans. That is so close. And the reason why Donald Trump went to Texas and said, I need you to redistrict, and why he's gone to a number of other states, Missouri, Indiana, several others, to do the same thing, is that if it's too close, he's afraid that body's going to hold him accountable. And he's afraid that his party's going to lose in the midterms, which is common, right? So this is him punching us in the face. He's saying, I don't want to play fair. I don't want an election that goes by the way that normal elections go. I want to rig it so I can win no matter what. And this is California's response to that. It's not saying that forevermore we're going to use this map that's been drawn for this purpose. It's a very targeted effort to try to say, you know what? We're not going to let you punch us in the face anymore. We are going to at least stand up for ourselves and stop pretending that we're still playing the same game that we used to play. So that's what's happening in this moment, and what Prop 50 represents.
Yeah, and just to jump in there, I think knowing the history of where the country that we are all from, Burma, we know what happened. The closest we got to real democracy, and within a year or so, it really became kind of what Secretary Htoo saying. They not only punched us in the face, they took back over the country and they threw people back into house arrest. And, so we cannot let ourselves move in that direction. Now, we may still, because there's other states doing redistricting, it may still not help us, but we have to go down fighting. That's my feeling, is like, at a minimum, we have to go down fighting, because they may be able to pick up more in other states. Like, I don't know, who was it, Utah or somebody else, or Iowa, somebody was doing something very similar, right? The interesting thing with all of this is, which was a very bizarre situation, was in Texas, they redrew into mainly Latino districts somehow, thinking potentially that they would somehow win those over, but we don't know what the calculus is on that, because it could be because of what they're doing with immigration that backfires on them. So we really don't know, but we do have to play their game. as terrible as that may sound, because we are not playing the same game. We cannot be in this position where they are coming down and punching us in the face, and being able to win. And sometimes you just have to do what you need to do to be able to fight at a time that is so critical, so incredibly critical to this country. We are in a place, and Secretary Sue, you can say, I don't think we've ever been we've never been here before. This is something very uncharted. And yeah, this is very uncharted. But as we said, this is not something that we're doing forever. And the independent redistricting, I think, was done well and done right. And we will go back to that. But we do have to make it. We have to survive this particular period in time, which is pretty scary for those of us that have not had to experience this. But I think those of you can look at Burma and see what has happened there, and see that we could be heading down that crazy path.
Yeah, so you guys talked about a game, and this makes me think of the game of constitutional hardball. So, of course, generally, in an ideal situation, we want to avoid playing constitutional hardball. Of course, we know that constitutional hardball, when done by anyone, generally works to weaken the strength of the Constitution. And we know that the Constitution, as arguably the oldest modern democratic document, is showing its fragility. Of course, you guys talk about dire circumstances making us have to play the game. So how do we go about playing the game of constitutional hardball, and this game that we've been continuing to play? How do we do that but still somehow manage to preserve the integrity of the United States Constitution in the long run?
I will let the secretary, who's actually lived in DC and had to be on the front lines on this for a number of years,
Yeah,
and
no.
a secretary in California as well.
So let me say, I do think, and I don't know, this is hard. Like, I'm looking at some of you, and I realize that you all have actually lived through some really hard times in a fairly short amount of time, right? I mean, I don't know, like, just looking at the ones I can see, who is your memory of the first president of the United States that you actually know?
Mine was Obama.
Okay, so you guys do, okay. So you have that memory at least, right? But you guys were probably pretty young. And so I feel like, most of you in the last, gosh, I don't know what it is, like, 8 years or more have been through a Donald Trump presidency. You've had COVID. I mean, not had, you've lived through COVID, what happened in the schools and all of that. And now you have another Donald Trump presidency where truly, all bets are off. Like, he doesn't play by any rules. And to your question about the Constitution, the Constitution has in place certain protections for people. When the people in power charged with ensuring that those protections are in place have decided to throw it out the door, what do you do? I think that is the moment that we are in right now. So, we have the very First Amendment to the Constitution is the right to a free press. This administration has completely, fired journalists, right? If you guys are following some of that, right? And, used their power, like their approval power around, news stations and whether there'll be mergers to essentially bribe and extort them, media outlets, into doing what they want. And so they've completely given up on the free press idea, right? Like, this deputy superintendent said, I've been in DC. I know what it's like to have a White House press corps. They've, this executive branch, this president has thrown people out if they ask questions that he doesn't like, right? I've been on Air Force One when you've got a press corps there and they're asking questions of you. He's now deciding who gets to do that and who doesn't. And so he's thrown the Constitution out. All kinds of other things, right? You guys probably know this, but birthright citizenship in this country has been established, right? It means like if you're born in this country, you're a citizen of this country. This administration has also said, we don't agree with that. We're just not going to respect that. And then on top of that, the way that the Constitution gets preserved, enforced, is through courts. And you go to, if you think your constitutional rights have been violated, you go to court, you get a decision, and people are supposed to comply with it. This administration, the Trump administration, has also completely ignored court rulings, right? So they've taken people, deported them. Those folks have sued to say this deportation violated my constitutional rights, and courts have said bring people back or don't let that plane leave, don't deport people at all, and they've still done it. So I think, Evan, it's a good question, right? What does it mean to live in a constitutional democracy when the people in charge are completely ignoring the Constitution? I think part of it is that we have to respect the rule of law and use it to preserve the rights and the protections that people have died for us to have. And so that means not playing, not playing the soft game, right? Like, and not being scared ahead of time, because part of what this administration wants to do is by attacking the free press, attacking educational institutions, right? Attacking, other branches of government, attacking our nation's cities, is for everyone to be so afraid that we don't speak up and criticize anymore, right? We say, well, we don't want to become the target, so we're gonna what we call comply in advance. Like, we're gonna just get in line with whatever Donald Trump wants without putting up a fight for it. And I think the most important thing about our constitutional democracy is that all of us has a voice, all of us gets to fight for our rights. And this is a moment in which that's the way that we ensure that our Constitution is preserved. Now, we have to do it in a way that is nonviolent. And I say that because for a whole bunch of reasons, but one of them is that one of the things that Donald Trump wants is that he wants people to react to him in a way that's going to justify him being even more violent in his crackdown, right? So, and I'm so proud of our communities writ large for not having fallen for that. He came out to LA, and right, Evan, you were here when he first sent the National Guard out?
Yeah.
Right? And he wanted there to be such he wanted the protests, the reaction to him to be so extreme that he could then justify the violence that he wanted to bring into place. And that didn't happen, right? And the same is true for DC, the same is true for Chicago, and the same has been true in Portland. And so he's having to get more and more extreme himself in order to do what he wants to do. So I think it's about our respect of the rule of law, our engaging in nonviolent resistance, but our using our voice in every possible way, because that is the right that all of us have, that's going to be the one that actually helps to save our constitutional rights. And sorry, to take it back to the what Co teed us off with, voting is really, really important, right? One main reason Donald Trump is in office is that a significant portion of the US population did not actually vote in the last election. And so voting in this moment, no matter where you live, but certainly if you're in California, given this special election in November, is really, really important to make sure that the Constitution continues to mean something.
And I'll just add to that, Julie, even though you may not be able to vote, you may be too young to vote, you may not be a citizen and can't vote, that does not mean that you cannot knock on doors and talk to everyone you know that can vote. And getting people registered to vote is so, so critical, because that's democracy. And we know there are countries that will not. Donald Trump doesn't even want to be able to let us vote and count our votes and being able to have our democracy. I mean, I think that's just what it is. It's like, that's all just so much at risk. And that's why I think, I'm not sure if you were there when I spoke on the steps of the Capitol at one point. There was the larger Burmese community where I said, we need to have you all run for office too, right? Like, I need you all to be, like, our voices have to be there, because the Burmese community has been in this country longer than the Vietnamese community, longer than the Lao community, longer than a lot of these other refugee immigrant communities. Yet I think there may be one elected, maybe a mayor or something somewhere in the entire country. And our population in LA and in the Bay Area, there are at least 50 or 60,000 or more, probably like 100,000 people from Burma. And we don't have a single elected representative. We need you all to be engaged and start at city council, start on commissions, start somewhere. But your vote and getting the votes for the community that can vote is so critical for this election. So critical. So that's going to be the only thing that we're going to be able to do to protect our constitutional democracy. So I'm just, again, so proud to have you all here and being civically engaged and wanting to learn about, what is going on.
So, Deputy Nicely, on that note, so as a first generation Burmese American yourself and a leader in educational equity, how do you see redistricting in this case impacting like immigrant and refugee communities, especially in terms of like political representation and their voice?
I think it will scare people. If we do not get this right, people will, number one, people are already afraid. Like, people don't know that, they all think we're the same. It doesn't matter. We're all, we are a community, and they will not know the difference between you or someone else, right? There's just not going to be that. So I think this will have a chilling effect on people feeling that they can get out and vote, that they can be politically active. We are fortunate right now that we can even speak like this on this webinar, right? We know that. We know in other countries, in Burma, like, we would be monitored right now and you all would be getting picked up. Like, right now, if we let things go down this other path, we will be censored, and we will not have even a free internet for us to be able to come on a Zoom. And a lot of people would not allow us to even record this, right, Co? Like, if we were to record this and someone were to get their hands on this, we would all be at risk. That is the issue. This is the place that we are in right now. And so in education, we, maybe it was last weekend, I don't know, everything's kind of a blur since January. I mean, these are the longest weeks of my life. We are all exhausted. And that's what they're trying to do too, like, wear us down to a point where we just can't even fight anymore. We're just so tired. But there were two bills that the state superintendent sponsored around immigration. One was that ICE and any immigration officials could not come on school grounds without warrants, without notice. Another one had to do with parents being notified right away if anyone was coming on campus and asking about students. And so all of our schools, we've been training. We have a toolkit out that we put out, but ever since since Trump won, we have done a lot of work with the Attorney General's office to create safe spaces around our schools and around our churches and around our community centers. We were sued over that. We fought back. And this is what we have been doing since January. And even in the Trump one, the fights were going on during that. Julie, were you hearing California at that point, right? So, and so we were working very closely with all of the unions to protect farm workers, to protect, a lot of our folks that are undocumented, that were working in hotels and working in these areas to try and create safety zones for individuals. right, in the labor movement. We were in the we were coming out of the legislature, but yeah, Trump 1 was the first year of superintendency for part of that, and then all during COVID. So in education, we are creating toolkits. We are working with with labor. We are working with law firms that are doing pro bono work. A lot of the immigration groups that Julie, of course, has also been with as well. Asians Advancing Justice worked a lot with the APAPA in both times to be able to deal with anti-Asian hate that has popped up again. So a lot of work that we've done in that space around education and trying to protect our immigrant communities during that period of time. And I can't even remember the question again. So sorry. So I mean, there's just so much to unpack, right, around everything that we've been trying to do through the superintendent and through his work very closely with the legislature to pass bills and work with the governor to ensure that those bills got passed to protect our populations. Because as Julie said, we have to work within our law. Like we have a state constitution, we have a legislature. Everything that we're trying to do is by the book. The governor could have done something, I suppose, and done an executive order saying, we're going to have an election and we're changing these districts and we're going to do just like the governor I don't even know if what they did in Texas was legal themselves, right? But we are trying to stick by our constitution and stick by the laws as closely as we can so that we're not going outside and breaking the law when we try and fight for democracy.
All right, this next question is directed towards Secretary Sue. So, of course, with redistricting, anytime there's a talk of that, there comes the talk about gerrymandering. And of course, we know that after several cases fighting against it, racial gerrymandering is now not legal. However, partisan gerrymandering is still legal, oftentimes presenting as such. So gerrymandering often dilutes the voices of working class communities, minorities, etc. What reforms do you think are most necessary to ensure that these voices are not only heard, but also represented well in Congress?
Great. So do you guys all know what gerrymandering is? Do you guys have a sense? So as
A
Evan said,
mix, just a mix, yeah.
yeah, so gerrymandering is basically when you draw the congressional lines for a certain purpose that isn't just to ensure that everybody has representation. So what Evan said, partisan gerrymandering is when you draw lines in order to favor a certain political party. So, and what, usually happens, right, is if you are in a majority Democratic state, if you have partisan gerrymandering, you're going to draw far more Democratic districts. And the opposite is true for Republican. What does that mean? Drawing the lines, there's no like magic formula for them. There is criteria that you're supposed to utilize, but that means that, let's say if you're a Democratic state and you want to create more Democratic districts, you might take all the Republicans and draw a circle or some weird shape around them, and then you make one Republican district, and the rest are Democrats because you have so many Democrats. Or you can say you don't want a Republican district, so you take all the Republicans and you draw funny shapes so that they split them all up, and there is not a Republican district, right? And vice versa. You can imagine how that works, as Evan says, for when it comes to racial gerrymandering, which is now not supposed to be allowed, but because of, the deputy superintendent mentioned earlier about, voter suppression and not wanting people to vote, it's often used as a way to take voting rights away from people of color. It's been used extremely, it's a terrible thing that still characterizes a lot of the districts that are drawn in the southern states of the United States. And for a long time in California, there were not, it was hard to get Asian Americans elected because the Asian American vote was always sort of split up among other districts based on other priorities. So, independent commission in California was a sort of an answer to partisan gerrymandering, right? It was a way of saying, we're not going to allow those who are elected to just draw districts to save themselves. We're going to do it different ways. So there have been answers to gerrymandering that takes away people's rights. Now, in some ways, gerrymandering has also been utilized to increase racial representation, though. So, in places, again, like California, where there's a lot more racial diversity, you'll hear people even talk about, the Latino seat, the Asian seat, right? You guys have heard that before. That's not a formal term because it's not supposed to be that. You're not supposed to base it on that. But the gerrymandering has been used to try to increase representation for different communities. Now, let me say really clearly, one of the premises of that is that people are going to vote for their own race. That's not always true either, right? And I think we can have a good discussion about that because the Asian American community is quite diverse, and so there are Asian Americans in office who I don't think are looking out for the interests of the Asian American community, right? So it raises all these other kinds of interesting questions. But to your point, Evan, there under the Voting Rights Act of 1965 in this country and subsequent interpretations of it by the courts, there are protections against the kind of gerrymandering that would take away the people's right to have their vote counted. The problem is this administration and conservative Supreme Courts have also diluted the value of the Voting Rights Act. So I'll just sort of go back to your earlier question, like, why does it matter? Why does all this matter? It matters to have people in office who actually care about democracy, who actually care about real representation, who actually believe that everybody should have the right to vote. And when we get out of this just incredible period of our nation's history, which I think, when the story of this period is told, two things. One is I do think that the ridiculous things that this administration is doing will be exposed for how horrific it is. But I think we will all have to answer the question, what were we doing in this moment to fight back against it? And that's why these kinds of conversations are so important. But once we get past this period, I feel like, what we really should be doing is answering, how do we ensure that the right to vote is genuinely true for every single citizen of this country? Because too many people feel like, their vote doesn't matter, their vote doesn't count. And there's all kinds of ways that drawing lines and also just, explicit voter suppression has kept some people from being able to exercise their right.
Thank you so much. On a similar note, you mentioned, of course, minority rights, and of course, in any sort of democratic system of government, it is rule of majority. Now, some of the points that you mentioned made me think about what James Madison wrote in Federalist 10. Of course, in Federalist 10, he talks about how the United States protects against faction, and how they balance protecting the rule of the majority with protecting the minority voter rights. And he talks about how the United States overall would be safe from that because the United States is large both in area and in population. However, we see that in today's day and age, that largeness, that size that he said would be a buffer against the majority faction that we see in government is kind of diluted by the fact that the internet exists. With the internet, people who are factionally minded can come into easy contact with each other. And we see how quickly and how aggressively a majority faction that may be akin to, or that may be against the interests of the majority of the common good, can take power. So how do you think, if the Madisonian checks and balances today and the institutions are not enough, how do you think moving forward we can manage to maintain this fragile balance between the rule of majority while having a voice for a minority of the voters?
I'll start, Deputy Superintendent, and then please jump in if that makes sense. I think that's an excellent question. And I think the idea of, how the internet and social media has impacted elections is really, really critical. Um, you know, it has upended the way elections work in many ways, right? In some ways, it has changed the way, people think about paying for ads. When I was at the Democratic National Convention back in August of 2024, there was an entire row set aside for young social media influencers, right? Like that's something that is, that certainly James Madison didn't think about, and it is a relatively new phenomenon. And I think the question of how social media affects our democracy is something that, a lot of people are writing about and thinking about right now, especially going back to my earlier point about, how do you distinguish fact from fiction, right? How do you hold people accountable for the truth? And so much of, I was on the campaign trail in my personal capacity in 2024. And if you went into, I don't know if anybody here is from one of the swing states, but every time I went to one and turned on the TV, it was an endless barrage of deeply racist anti-immigrant commercials and deeply biased anti-trans and anti-LGBTQ commercials. And they just flooded the airwaves with this over and over and over again, way out of proportion to how much those issues actually affect people's lives. So I think one of the things I'll say about this is I do believe that we need to restore credible bodies that can provide valid information, right? Disinformation is terribly harmful to a democracy. So I think that's one thing I would say that's really important. The other thing is, I hope that you all do not think that this administration's way, anything that it's doing is normal or acceptable in any way. So even in a democracy where somebody wins and somebody loses, right? We don't have the kind of, like some countries have, you get proportional representation, right? If you won 30% of the vote, your party gets 30% of representation. If you won 50, you get 50. We're a winner take all, right? So all of us who did not vote for the current administration have to live under the current administration. But no matter what, there's always been throughout US history a sense of propriety among the person who gets elected, that you are elected for the entire country. I heard my boss, Joe Biden, say that over and over and over again the whole time that we were in office, right? That, I am not the president for Blue America. I'm the president for all of America. When we did anything, whether it was enforce laws or put out federal dollars to fix roads and bridges or make sure every house had clean water, we didn't say we're only going to do blue states. In fact, more of that money went to red states. I spent a lot of time in the American South where we were not going to win elections overall, but it mattered because that's where there's a lot of intergenerational embedded poverty. And so that's what it means to govern in a democracy. And this administration that has been so explicitly about, if, I'm sending the National Guard to blue cities in blue states because you didn't vote for me, is unconscionable. It's like it's out of bounds of what I think anybody, including our founding fathers, thought about when we talked about what it meant to have majority rule. So I think that piece of like, let's not normalize it, let's not accept it, and let's call it for what it is, which is totally anti-American and anti-democratic as often as we need to, is really, really important.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in briefly because I know you guys have, I think we have Marilyn who needs to speak, and we've got 1 minute left. So, but I think this is where we talk about digital literacy, right? And this is where it's critically important as young people that are kind of like immersed in this. And because I'm over information technology systems, we're talking about artificial intelligence, and we're talking about a lot of these things that are influencing how people, what they're seeing, and this fear that is being brought to the forefront by this administration, to fear fear the other. And we will always be that other, right? Our API community will always look the way we look. We can't fade in with anybody else. This is what we look like. This is who we are, right? And but there is this fear that is sending the National Guard into cities where literally I'm going to be at a wedding in Portland next week, and I talk to my friends who live there. It's like, well, am I going to be in the demilitarized zone? Or and you look at the pictures and people are dressing up like frogs and kitty cat. I mean, anything to try and like dispel this fear mongering that is being used on the blue states, right? That they're and also the interesting thing here with this democracy and this representation is where we may have to, which is the reverse of other countries that have gone through these military hunches. I think the military may have to be like is potentially going to be our ally on this. If you saw the horror, really like the stoic faces of the military that is being told to come into and fight the citizens, which is absolutely not unconstitutional. Right. Like at the top of the list there, you will not go in and fight your own, to your own people. But around, and I think to the point around these minority versus majority representation, as Secretary Sue said, the Biden administration, it didn't matter that you were the minority. You were citizens or inhabitants of this country, and you were going to be represented by that president and this Congress and these people. And so I think when people are often saying, well, you're not talking enough to middle America, blah, blah, blah. Like, that's actually just not the case. Like, California is the ATM of the country. Like, we send more money to the federal government than we get back. So when people say you're not being represented because you're a minority, that is not true. Like, we are actually funding the programs and around rural America, farmland America, all of these folks that don't feel like they're being represented. Right now, when we have a disaster, the Biden administration, Democratic, I won't even say, this is just the weird one. Even under the Bush administration, like, there have been Republican presidents that have come in and represented the country and all of its citizens. Right now, disaster relief is not being sent to Democratic states. Like, this is so unconscionable. Like, you are the president of everyone. And so when we do have these discussions around the majority and minority of representation, if you have democracy working in the right way, Governor Newsom is not saying, hey, there's a fire in Lake County or Placer County, which are definitely red territory. Every type of resource that we can give is being sent to those areas. It does not matter. So if you have a democracy that works right, the majority may rule, but governing is governing for everyone. So I just want to just say that.
Thank you so much. One final question for the two of you. So young people can often feel disconnected from political processes. Even if they can vote, they may feel disconnected from processes like redistricting. And what practical steps could youth, especially those from like immigrant or working class backgrounds, take to influence representation in the communities? And on that same note, what role do community-based organizations like CKYC ourselves play in holding leaders accountable for fair and inclusive representation?
Go ahead.
Okay,
Secretary
so
Sue.
I think organizations like CKYC could not be more important. Again, that's why when, Co invited me, or even when I met Co, I'm really grateful for the 12 years of work of this organization. I think that having spaces where people can come together, organize around issues, learn their rights, and speak with a collective voice that is so important. And that's why whenever I have been inside of government, I've really invited those organizations to be active partners in whatever it was that I was doing. And I see the deputy superintendent nodding too, because I think that's just good government, right? Some people would say, well, you can't do that. You're not supposed to, you're supposed to be neutral. I think that in order to be effective, in order to truly be a government that serves the people, you want to be as connected to people as you can be. And community-based organizations